All right, all welcome to the fall 2022 Future of Work interview series with uFlexReward. We're speaking to people from around the total rewards industry, from practitioners to industry gurus like today, tech providers to get their opinion on where things are going with the future of work and personalized rewards. You can catch all the interviews at uflexreward.com/interview series. Any questions or guest suggestions, you can hit me up at Sean, S-E-A-N, at uflexreward.com. And now I'm excited to chat with Anita Lettink, a partner at Strategic Management Center.
Hi, Sean. How are you today?
I'm good. Great to have you. And thanks for taking the time out of the schedule.
Good to be here.
So can you start off and just kind of talk about your organization, because I think it brings a unique, insight and perspective to the industry view, and so it'll just give people a chance to kind of see how you're looking at the industry.
Yes, I'm a partner at Strategic Management Center, and we're a board advisory company. So all the partners have had a distinguished career at a consultancy firm, and then decided that they wanted to continue as an independent. My focus within the company is mostly on workforce strategy, people, technology, especially in light of the digital HR transformation and given my background in HR and payroll, obviously.
Okay, awesome. That's an interesting perspective. So again, we're trying to find industry, I guess, leaders and experts and thinkers actually for here. So, the big question to get started with, what does the future of work look like? I know it's a loaded question, but what's it look like from your vantage point, being able to work at the board level and look across multiple companies?
I think that we're already headed towards creating the future of work, right? And the pandemic was an accelerator to that effect. It wasn't that we started to use new technologies, because the technologies were already there. It was just that we did not use them in the way that they were supposed to be used, or in the way that they could be used. And so when all of a sudden everyone needed to pack up their stuff and work from home, fortunately, we had all that technology and we were able to do so. And that granted people a freedom in a sense of that some of the work was suddenly not tied to a location anymore. And I think when we are shaping the future of work, that connection between work and location has now broken, right? And you can start to think about work in a sense that what absolutely has to be performed in a certain location and what really can be done from anywhere. And that gives everyone, both employers and employees, a lot more flexibility. So I think that flexibility, the word flexibility, is key when we think about shaping the future of work, because what we've left behind for a large part is this notion of a work day from 9 to 5 in a specific location 5 days a week. There are still jobs that adhere to those boundaries, but for many jobs that did and didn't have to, those ties have now broken. And I think that going forward, we will see that flexibility being taken advantage of to a maximum.
So when you talk about that flexibility, I mean, do you see companies putting value on that, employees placing value on that? I mean, we'll get to personalized rewards, but how do you see, how do you see companies taking advantage of that? Or do you see them struggling with the flexibility? And to your point, what do you do with the companies that have a mix of in the future of work, a mix of employees who need to be on site and those that kind of can flex or be off site?
I think what we shouldn't forget is that some employees or a lot of workers embrace the fact that they have to go to a place of work because they do not want to work from home, and they like the structure that a workplace and a 9 to 5 job gives them. So it's not that everyone has to work remote. It is just adding an option that didn't exist for many people. And that a lot of people suddenly realized, wait a minute, I enjoy the fact that I can now structure my workday in such a way that I can break it up that I also have time maybe to go to the gym in the middle of my day, and then I come back and work on. And don't forget that this flexibility also helps employers. Given the labor shortages in many countries around the world currently, when you can work from anywhere, that also means you can source talent from anywhere. So from, for them, the labor market has just opened up.
It's an interesting point because I've prognosticated there will be some companies that lean into the in-person piece, and their corporate culture will be it's more familial, and you come in and you have a workplace. And of course, I'm an American who lives in the middle of nowhere, so I have extra space to work. And so we sometimes forget that, people want an office because of the tight space to actually go and get out of the house somewhere. So kind of changing a little bit to personalized rewards, and you can beat me up on the term of personalized rewards if you want, but do you see kind of the future of work creating more personalized rewards or more selection across the myriad of reward elements? Or do you see companies staying kind of in their analog, position where they have, and here's our offering? How do you kind of see that moving? And actually, from your perspective, since it's across multiple companies, how fast do you see that coming from an it sounds cool, but I'm curious on the actual adoption phase.
Yeah. So it's interesting because back in 2019, I ran a future work survey. And one of the outcomes was that employees were searching for a more personalized approach, both to work, but also to their compensation. And that more personalized approach correlated with the lifestyle that they were currently living, right? So imagine if you're in your early 20s, you're just getting settled, then compensation in the form of salary payments is super important because maybe you want to buy a house, right? Or you're renting your first apartment and you need to furnish it. So money in your hands, cash in the bank, super important in that part of your life. And then you move on and you have kids, maybe. You find a partner, you have kids. And suddenly things like health insurance or maybe a pension or a widower's pension become really important. So insurance is key to that part. And then later on, we find that as people get older and they start taking care of their parents, time is of the essence. You want to spend some time with your parents, or maybe also with kids, or someone else that is dependent on you. So there's this whole, I would almost say, whole board of benefits options that are available to workers. But key to this is that they want to have it fit to the stage of their life that they are currently in. And I think what is also very important here is that companies should not make assumptions about which choices belong with which people, because as we now know, you can have kids at any point in your life, maybe in your 20s or in your 30s, and some older people also start a new family. They have young kids again. So it's really offering all the options and not making choices for employees, but have them make the choices.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that's not a planned question. We or not a planned answer. We just did with a client a pilot that basically allowed them to give away $1 of base pay for $1.25 of short-term incentive, or $1 of short-term incentive for 75 cents on the dollar, basically. And about half the people took advantage, and it actually falls along what you just mentioned. Younger people took base pay in general. And to your point, actually, it wasn't all of them, right? Obviously, there were outliers, if you want to call them that. And then half were older. I think the other piece of that is just wealth accumulation. As they get later, you've got enough base pay to pay the bills. I'm willing to risk a few bucks. I also know myself and the company, etc. So it's interesting you say that, because I think it's spot on. And to be honest, I forgot kind of about some of the aspects you had. So it is really complicated. Do you see, from I guess kind of a two-pronged question, do you see companies moving to, it's one of my favorite questions, a time and place at which they offer compensation as basically a salary, and they pick and choose how they want to share that. So it's not base pay of 150,000 euros plus these buckets of benefits. Do you see them going to, hey, we're going to pay you 210,000 euro, and you pick and choose how you want to spend that?
I think so it's an interesting question, because if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said yes. Because back then there really was this trend to make this whole bucket available, and then you just pick and choose. I think over time we've seen some companies pivot away from that, simply because the amount of change was impossible to keep up with. And they also thought that employees were making choices that were maybe not in their best interest. And then what we saw, and I think this is what we see now, is they're giving employees base pay, and that base pay is a set amount. And you're not to play around with your base pay. You're also not to play around with the bucket that is for insurance. But everything else, you can sort of do with what you like. You can buy extra vacation days. You can put it into an investment fund. You can exchange it for cash. So I think employers have become or taken the part of that they want to guide their employees, at least in a little bit, towards making smart decisions on benefits. Also help them to think long term sometimes when they want to think short term. And that, I think, comes from the insight that mental health issues with employees often stem from financial issues. Because if you're worried all day long about the debts that you have, you simply cannot do a good job at work. So I think that what we'll see is more of this move where employers start to help educate people and give them access to financial wellness tooling, and then guide them into making decisions about pay and benefits.
So basically a core and flex model, basically, where you're defining the core and letting them flex. And I guess I'd argue on the medical, again, more from an American perspective. I think that might change based on country. So I think a lot of this is country specific. So in the US, obviously, the argument has typically been, if I'm a single person, I'm getting less value from my medical benefits than a family, because the value is different. Obviously, in other places, you have nationalized medicine, and which is a whole many-day discussion, I'm sure, on that. How do you see, so do you think employees, kind of summarizing that, have the capacity or willingness to make those choices, or where do you see the hurdles in getting a program like that put in place around choice? Because what I'm hearing you say is, if you give them full reign, it's almost overwhelming and there's potential to make bad choices, which I agree with you in that. I think companies always look blue sky. How cool is it to, give someone $1 of base pay for $1.25 of more bonus until they don't get their bonus, right? Yeah. And then you have to deal with that issue, right? So everyone always looks at the blue sky. How do you think employees will uptake that, and how do you think companies can best address having uptake in education there?
I think there's a couple of solution providers have come to market that help with specifically this topic. So they give employees an overview of what is available and then walk them through the choices, but also through the potential consequences of these choices. And that is important because when people make choices and there is an abundance of choice, we know that people struggle, and it's more of a mental issue than that they can actually focus on the choice, right? And so this well-known famous option of giving people 3 choices brings them peace of mind, and helps them actually make a decision instead of giving them 10 or 15 choices and then they just don't know where to begin anymore. Not everyone is as financially literate as we would like them to be. And so when you put in place a program like this, you have to look at your workforce very honestly and understand where they are. Look, if you only work with maybe with university students, like with very well educated people, they might need a little bit less of support than other people. But even university students get into debt, so it's not as black and white as I'm assuming it to be. I think everyone can benefit from some financial education before you make those actual choices. Like we just mentioned, and like you just mentioned, some of them are long term. If you bought a house based on the bonus payments that you assume you are going to get, and now you cannot pay your mortgage because, well, the company didn't meet their goals this year and there is no bonus, that is a big problem. And so we really should educate people around, your base pay is fixed, your bonus might not be there next year. And we hope it is there, or it might only be 10 or 20%. So don't use that as fixed income. Super important for people to have that education. Yes.
No, I agree. And I think if you can even eke out, I think it's more important as you get to hourly workers, because if you can eke out for them an extra couple $1,000s in value, that means a lot. The C-suite might not, that's a rounding error for some companies, right? So, but when you start talking about hourly workers and being able to, add a couple $1,000s in value in the for the same amount of money for the company, it's huge, but you don't want them to actually have a couple $1,000 error. Because that's also huge. So that's really, really good point. So just pivoting a little bit as we talk about that, how do you see with personalized rewards and the ability to kind of move things around and have different reward elements? How do you see that playing into kind of pay equity and pay transparency?
So before I answer that question, what does pay equity mean to you?
Yeah, so it's actually one of the reasons I came here. So for me, pay equity is obviously equitable pay, and you can transparency is, obviously the ability to see it, but equitable pay across, gender, ethnicity, and age. And for me personally, and this is why I like to ask the question, it's across total rewards. And the example I would generally give is right now companies look at it across typically gender, across base pay. But if a company decides to give, you 500, shares, and they give me 2,500 shares, are we really equitably paid if our base salary is the same? And I'm going to argue no. And that also doesn't include, benefits. So if for some reason there's, it might be more on age than gender when you talk about some of these other reward elements. If all of a sudden I'm offering these and it looks like all the older population is taking advantage of something and the others aren't, do we have a pay equity issue? And so for me, that's the pay equity issue. Are we equitably compensating people or giving them the opportunity to take advantage of the same things across the board? Sorry, that was long-winded, but that's
it was a very good explanation, Sean. Thank you for that. I think what you are right. When people look at pay transparency or equity, the first thing they typically look at is salary, right? Because that is easily found in the systems. It's very obvious. And also, let's not forget, people talk, right? And people exchange their salary information just out of curiosity, or they want to know what someone else is making, and they forget what else is there. And I do remember that when I was managing a company, I specifically implemented a total compensation overview that we sent to every employee every year. Because what I had noticed is that some people left and they thought they would be better off at a competitor, but they were only looking at their salary. And so at the end of the year, they missed out on some of the benefits that we would provide to them, and were in fact worse off because
Yeah.
those companies didn't have such a great pension plan. Now, you don't notice that today, but let me tell you, once you turn 65 or 67, you will notice it. So that is why I thought it was super important to have people look at their total compensation, especially in Europe, where I'm a bit more aware of what's going on. That sometimes amounts to 30 or 40% of base pay. So it is, it's considerable. And that is why I absolutely agree. If you look at pay equity and you don't take, total compensation into account, what are you actually looking at?
Okay.
And especially the example that you gave with share plans, I have noticed that is a way that many people lose out.
Yeah, and it's hard to track. I think that's, I do think, us aside, it's a little self-serving, but 10 years ago, I think you could make that talk, but the work for the human resources department to aggregate that data was difficult. And now there are tools out there that you can get your arms around everything that's out there. And so now it's kind of on you to be a fair and equitable payer and figuring that out. And I think the hard part, of course, is managing that going forward. Finding you have a problem. I think there's a little bit of the ostrich method, for lack of a better term, right now. If I don't look, I don't have to fix it. I can claim, ignorance, but how do you fix it? Because it is complicated. If you do have a share inequity, how do you deal with that? It's not a near-term fix with share allocation. So it's, by highlighting the problem, you create a lot of work for yourself. Do you see companies, kind of, I'm interested because obviously I'm a little more altruistic on that side on the pay equity. Do you see companies actually moving to look at total compensation and across kind of a matrix of not just gender, but ethnicity and age? Are they making that move, or is it kind of more talk right now?
I think some companies are making the move, but it's mostly the companies that operate in countries where it has become law to report on pay equity, and therefore there's pay transparency. I think we're also seeing a little bit of that now because some geographies are starting to put laws in place where you have to actually put a salary range in the that or in your vacancy, and that means that if your salary range is too broad, then suddenly your current employees are starting to ask questions, right? And if it's very narrow, then people can also sort of gather from that what the salary range should be. So I think there's a little bit of a push and pull going on right now around this whole topic of pay equity. I think what we've seen so far is only the beginning. The major bulk of companies needing to take action on this is in front of us. Yeah. So there's opportunity for you, Sean.
Well, I think it's, it's interesting because, again, from a tool, and again, obviously we know our tool from a product standpoint, but the fundamental problem that I see companies facing is, okay, I see the problem, but how do you fix it? And of course, it's a moving target because once I fix it and then I go through a promotion cycle or a unit, RSU cycle, whatever it is, merit cycle, all those, the problem, to your point, I hire someone, the target's always moving. And so it's a lot of work. And the way you have to tackle that is in some financial method, one way or another, which nobody wants to talk about at the board level, right? So the tool becomes kind of the easy part, to be honest. How you are ready as a corporate culture to be willing to tackle those, that to me is bigger. And I don't have, as a technical nerd, I don't have a solution for that one. That one's much harder. So how do you see, as you look at getting these personalized rewards in place, as you look at companies trying to move to personalized rewards, whether that's to open enrollment of rewards, reporting on the rewards, or equity, what do you see the key 2 or 3 items for companies to kind of make that move going forward? What do you see as the key elements for companies to be successful doing that?
So the first item, also the most important item, is, I would say, is talk to your employees before you do anything. What I've seen is that companies, especially HR departments, started to prepare for this, chose a solution, put compensation items in there, and then they released it, and it was a big dud. Simply because people were like, yeah, but I don't want to choose, or I don't understand why I can choose A but not B. So it is super important to really understand what matters to your employees and where they would like this flexibility and what they would like to keep to be untouched, right? Yeah. So that is the first. That's the first one. And then the second one, and it sort of follows from this, is your communication and your education is key to success when you introduce such a program. And then I'm also going to add a third one, and that is, if you're a company that operates in a number of different countries, understand really well what is mandatory and where what you can make flexible, right? Because we've been talking about health benefits a couple of times. Well, to me, as a person who lives in the Netherlands, we have universal healthcare. So I don't even think about my health insurance. It's a given. I pay for that every month. And so I don't even consider it a benefit. It's something that I pay, and in exchange, I can go to a doctor and a hospital, and that is taken care of. So when you operate internationally, you will have to be ready for the fact that programs are different, benefits are different country by country, and it might be a little bit more complex than you think. But it certainly can be done. I have worked with a number of companies that ran this international. I've also worked with a couple of product vendors that had international or global solutions. Think through it very well, prepare it very well. But in all the projects that I was involved in, employees were happy that they were able to make choices for themselves and that they were able to tailor a package to their personal circumstances. So that's
great.
Yeah,
that's great. I actually, it's interesting. I'm so glad to hear you talk about the talk to employees first. I've been presenting several places around the keys to personalized rewards, and everyone always thinks I'm going to talk about technology first. And the first thing I talk about is, I call it corporate culture, but you have to have a really hard discussion with yourself about your company's culture and what your employees want and how you envision, and you're, the EVP, to use the buzzword, but basically it doesn't matter how cool the tech is if you put it in and they all are upset about it. Like, it just doesn't matter. And so why spend the money, as much as we'd love to have money spent on tech, if you don't have the employees on board? So I'm super stoked to hear that first, because I think a lot of people want to put in the cool tool to look like progress, but if it doesn't work, then later it doesn't work. What do you see? I mean, those are kind of the hurdles, but do you see any other key hurdles to making that happen besides the employee piece?
I think from an implementation perspective, or from a perspective, it is as many of the other HR solutions that that companies roll out. And so I don't think there's anything that could be a potential hurdle that wouldn't be a hurdle for another solution rollout.
Okay. And then just, kind of ending with, which has all been great, just kind of, as you sit across the top, you have this unique view, kind of your parting comments, or where do you see things going? And, if you can send a message out to, folks in the total reward space on where you see things going, or things to be keeping their eye on, anything cool you see, basically just open comment.
There's a couple of trends that I'm following. And from an employee perspective, or employer-employee perspective, there's one trend that is key, I think, to every decision that people make, is hyper-personalization. People want to have a personal relationship with their company, And they also want to understand that their company has a personal relationship with them. Not the relationship they have with their colleague, it's with me. And so therefore, things like benefits have to be tailored to me, to what I want, to what I need in this specific moment in time. And it could change next year, and I should be able to make that change next year. So back to the flexibility, it also needs to be flexible. So it needs to put me as the employee in control, needs to reflect my personal circumstances, and it needs to be flexible. Those are the three things I would keep in mind.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it. And, obviously you can be found on LinkedIn for those that are watching, can reach out. And I really appreciate you taking the time, and hope people reach out. It's been great to get your perspective across the broad industry, because it is just unique versus a practitioner's kind of talking about their one organization and one lens. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. It was good to be here.